Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Blue Morpho podcast. I am your host, Maestro Hamilton, and I am here today with Michael Garfield, who is an extraordinary individual that has studied the deep history and has been in the cutting edge of technology, taking us really on the evolutionary journey of the planet and life all the way to what humans are doing today to create the future. And so, Michael, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thanks, Hamilton. This is long overdue. I'm
It
glad
is
we finally
indeed.
get one in the books.
Yeah, for those that don't know, we've been talking about this for a while. It's today's the day. We're on retreat here at Heliconia Lodge, drinking ayahuasca, and that's the Amazon River behind us. Where are you, and what have you been up to?
I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico, at about 7,200 feet, so about as biome distance as possible from the Amazon, and very envious of being adjacent to a large body of flowing water. Actually, that's like that'll be my ingress into the context. I just got back from, as we were talking about before the recording, a honeymoon with my partner of 20 years and the mother of my two kids, because we do things out of order as a matter of course. And we spent a good deal of the time, we were married next to a lake where we did a lot of camping in college, and I saw, I had my first UFO experiences in that field where we were married. And then, we followed rivers uphill into the Rockies and got to drive through some epic, gorgeous Midwestern storms and hang out with a bunch of toads after the storms, and put my feet in the Animas River in Durango. And there was just lots of water on that trip, and it was bittersweet because this celebration of our union, which had punctuated an especially sort of emotionally dry period of the last 5 years of just living here in Santa Fe and being devoted to work and to the care of two small kids, which is joyous, but it's like you're the river of life in that scenario. And it's nice. It was, I don't know what I'm saying exactly, just that, like, I think so much about dissipation. I think so much about life as physics, about the idea of biological systems as being part of this current of energy and matter and information in the cosmos. And but then there's also this sort of desert mystic thing, which is that you are dependent on the whim of, is it going to rain? Oh, it is, but it's only going to rain on that side of town. And is the water going to be flowing? Maybe they will let the dam open up in the mountains, a few days at a time. And so, yeah, just an interesting kind of contrast.
Well, it's true that the deserts represent a different kind of union with nature, and there's something unique to me about water, considering how much of us is water. And I wondered what drew you to the deserts and how you ended up there. I've been in the Santa Fe area, and it's gorgeous, and it's considered a place of great spirituality and an energy center in the world. And I just wondered how that has been represented for you since you ended up there.
Yeah, I mean, I was drawn here for a gig. I worked for 5 years in science communication for the Santa Fe Institute, which is either you've either never heard of it or you regard it with some kind of intensity as either a kind of pilgrimage destination, a place where great minds convene to think about great problems and great mysteries, or you have some sort of sand in your diapers about the place and have implicated it in a globalist conspiracy theory or something. It's a very cloistered kind of scientific monastery. Like many other things out here, there's something about the nature of the desert, that culture here, compared to Austin, Texas, where we lived before, where I worked for a clean water conservation organization called Save Our Springs, and literally was in the sacred springs of Austin every week, giving people ecology tours. And the culture in Austin flows. There's just a very different thing. There's always a place to be. You're always being invited somewhere. And in Santa Fe, it's little pockets of secret activity, burrows that people have made in the landscape. And SFI is one of those burrows. And it was my benighted task to kind of help the river flow out of that place when, in fact, I think most of the organization the leadership would have preferred to keep it kind of isolated. So a strange job to have. But yeah, we moved up here basically, because Austin was turning into something that broke my heart, and it was succumbing to, and this is our landing pad if you want to talk about technology and economy and so on. That Austin had like many scenes, right? Scenes start as a kind of island of culture and a network of people that know each other and create amazing new creative things together. And then scenes become a prey organism for larger systems of extraction. And so basically, as soon as East Austin's gourmet was in the New York Times, like the writing was on the wall, and then suddenly it's where Elon Musk and Joe Rogan and all these people are moving in to launch their ventures, and the city very swiftly became a place where no one even knew where the springs were. They had all just moved there for tech jobs, and they were not leaving their homes. They were, but they were, it was only to go downtown and, partake in consumer experiences. And the river, which I see as kind of a layer in this transmedium strata of, like, there's a river of commerce on top of that. And there is no such thing here in Santa Fe. Santa Fe is, like I was saying about, the Santa Fe Institute, Santa Fe is a site of pilgrimage for people, I think, as a tourist town. It's a place where, a lot of people come to visit, but not a lot of people actually live. And as the town has become known over the last several decades for its aesthetic appeal, then it's gotten itself into a weird, the way that kind of predation manifests here is not that people move here and stay, it's that people buy vacation properties here and then price out the people that actually want to live in this town. So in a weird way, we're kind of lucky, because while I was still gainfully employed, we managed to get a house here during COVID at an unbelievably low mortgage. These are mundane things, but like, there's a spiritual dimension to all of this, which is that we have, in the words of the Santa Fe Institute, we have or of complex system science, we have climbed to a local optimum on the fitness landscape. And were we to try and leave Santa Fe now, we've kind of like washed up here. Were we to try and leave, it would mean going through all the hardship of selling our house to buy what, like in Austin, it would be like a cheaper house, but at more than twice the mortgage. So like we can't move downhill now. We can't move through the trough to climb another peak. And so we're here, and it's interesting to sort of reconcile that, the, like you're saying, the logic of the desert and of the mountains and of limit and scarcity with the other kind of, the abundance that this landscape affords, which is a landscape of beauty and mystery and wonder and magic and strangeness and and the abundance of meaning that I experienced living in a place so close to where the Los Alamos National Laboratories were and still are. In like watching Oppenheimer and realizing that like my neighbors work on plutonium, and it's a very it's one of those places where it's very easy to see how the entire world is contained in a single seed of but at the same time, strangely, inversely, Austin, which was this much larger nexus of import and export and currency exchange and international transit, strangely felt more isolated than it's like this is a place where literally everyone passes through on tour. Like if you are a musician, but it was an island in a sea of Texas, whereas this weird little backwater capital city is, it feels like the whole world is next door in a strange way. I don't know.
You bring up so many key points we can go down in rabbit holes to check out in that. I think that becomes a great framework. Just yesterday, I was here with the group, and they're asking what happens in ayahuasca if you get spiritually stuck. Like if something eats you, or you get somehow caged, or somehow stuck. And I said to them, I think it's exactly the same as being in a bad mortgage, and you find yourself in a situation completely stuck. That was the metaphor I used. I don't think they're two different things. I think it's just a different system where you find yourself stuck. And they go, well, what happens when you get spiritually freed from that? Like if you go in and you have something free, I go, how do you get freed? I go, well, call a spirit that can free you from being stuck. And they said, well, what happens? I go, well, I think what happens is that you can move on. You get past whatever that blockage is. And so and then you go to this idea of science and this epicentral seed of understanding, and Austin and this tech flow and what tech is becoming. And we were saying right before the podcast started, in my life, I have here on this side plant medicine that I've been in since my early 20s. And I realized that what the indigenous people were tapping into was something scientific, real, repeatable, and yet to truly be studied by science. It had been like this hidden knowledge base. And then I met information technology over here, and realized that there was an actual bridge between them when they're normally seen as these two really separate, containers. And it makes me think a lot of tech. I've spent some time because of tech in Silicon Valley and with some people in the Austin space. And it turns out they're all using plant medicines and psychedelics. It's all closeted. No one wants to really talk about it openly and publicly. And it turns out that they have been unbroken lineages of psychedelic use in the tech industry at least in the United States, since the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and now. And it's happening every weekend. It's happening in private groups. The best of the best facilitators in the world are called in to support this. And it's underground and it's happening. And so, this idea that there's this separation in culture is a fallacy. And it's really all inside one nexus of development, innovation, and this core seed of what's really happening here of the planet. Just speak to that. How have you been seeing that in your own experience and your own, exploration of technology?
Yeah, well, it's been okay. So after I left the Santa Fe Institute last year, I foundered a bit and then eventually found my way into a contract with Mozilla, where I was working as a research analyst for this open source AI spin-out that they've been incubating, that wants to fulfill the founding vision of the internet and personal computing. And I found this to be an incredibly alluring and an interesting project, because the more I was tasked with researching the history of technological innovation so that they could demonstrate due diligence to funding agencies, that they understood what it takes to build an organization and a community of development around something that could make magical things happen. And so I most of last fall I spent writing this enormous research briefing on that topic, while in the background I had this other question I was supposed to answer, and then eventually this question got deprecated to my dismay, which was a question about how such systems can be cultivated so that they are generating so that they're encouraging not just innovation of new technological powers, but the wisdom to use them in a way that is, that balances their creative and their destructive potentials. If you can even talk about that, like, right, in that way. So in that time that I was researching all of this stuff, it was sort of like one of those, what do they call those? Oh God, there's the cinematographic term for when you're zooming in with the camera, but it's on a rail, so you're pulling away at the same time, and you get that moment where it's like the revelation of where you actually are in the landscape of all of this stuff. And this is like, basically, this is what's supposed to happen to someone in a liberal arts education, right? Like, you realize where you're standing. And I realized that I was standing, as you put it, in this unbroken. I mean, I always kind of knew this because I was friends with people like Bruce Damer, who, worked at NASA Ames on astrobiology and had been part of, these low-key legendary computer development teams back in the 80s. And, was friends with, like Bob Taylor of, of Xerox PARC and all this stuff. And I was friends with, am friends with Brian Arthur, who's an economist at PARC and at the Santa Fe Institute. And he's told me a lot of this stuff and so on and so on. But like, what I realized was that Doug Engelbart, who gave the mother of all demos, that's, it's what it's called. It was like the first time that the vision of networked personal computers with a graphical user interface and a keyboard and mouse and so on, joined in a local network. When he presented that was a vision that, at least in part, came to him when he was on LSD in a Stanford research pilot study in 1955. And then, you've got all of this other stuff, which I already knew that, Kary Mullis, who invented the DNA polymerase chain reaction, which is the thing that the process that allows us to do biological engineering, that allows us to do genetics at scale in the laboratory, says that came to him on a psychedelic experience. And that's where this continuity, this bridge that you're talking about, starts to become much more apparent, because the transformations of the life sciences, the rhetorical transformations of the life sciences, as my friend and mentor Richard Doyle puts it in his writing, from an analog to a digital language, hinge on genetics and hinge on the idea that the organism can be kind of broken down into discrete algorithms, and that we can make the mystery of life transparent to quantitative research. And that's a transformation that was going on, like you said, thanks to what is really the one evolution of psychedelic research in the West, and the development of digital computing. And so, and then you've got people like Ralph Abraham, the chaos theorist in Santa Cruz, who admits that he and his buddies were manufacturing DMT in their garage while they were working on the first algorithms for representing fractals on computer screens. And that just, like, the more you start to scratch the paint of this, the default story about this, the more it becomes clear that what we're actually talking about here, basically I found myself doing research for a book that I had told everyone I was planning to write on leaving SFI, and had kind of stalled out on a book about Jurassic Park, actually, and how you can see this story of genetically engineered, de-extincted organisms as the object through which all of this stuff can be understood. And strangely also that the film itself was the precise moment in the history of filmmaking technology where we went from stop motion miniatures to and animatronics to computer graphics. And that there's this documentary called Light and Magic, about industrial light and magic, where they did the digital dinosaurs, where Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy talk about the first test screening of the walking Tyrannosaurus CGI maquette. And they say everyone in the screening hall had a religious experience, because they realized that suddenly they had total control over what people could see on screen, that storytelling had somehow gone through a phase transition in that moment, which is the same kind of Faustian high that genetic engineers themselves experience in their visions of what can be accomplished with code poetry, manipulating the molecular basis of the organism. So there's this whole thing going on, and the joke for me, which is contained in the message of Jurassic Park, is that there's Jung used this term enantiodromia, or the creation of the opposite. You run far enough in one direction and you create a countercurrent. And in this case, the enantiodromia here is that modern science, in its efforts to better understand and control the world, have led us into a place of such sublime complexity and indeterminate, like what Brian Arthur calls fundamental uncertainty in the complexity of economics. And that's him using economics in a way that includes the exchange of matter, energy, and information in ecological systems of all kinds, right? There's an economics of the forest, which thankfully more and more people are becoming comfortable talking about in that way. That we get to a point where the success of the project of the conquest of nature has brought us to a point where the only way to move forward is with humility into an impenetrable mystery, and so and to accept that the more we try to for instance, to try and regulate the biosphere with synthetic biology and computer surveillance requires more resources than exist on the planet. This is something that is mathematically robust. Like you can know you can know the C. elegans worm. It's only got 900 something cells, but when we talk about who knows that worm at the genetic level, we're talking about entire teams of people with well-funded research labs. And so it's like, well, what do you think it's actually going to take to control Earth, in that way? It's going to take creating systems that are so much more enormous and costly and unmanageably complex that, like, what's the point? And so we get to the still center of the gyrus of creation and destruction in contemplating this stuff. And so it's funny because it got me to the point where I was like, okay, so what does it mean to realize the mission of this organization, this AI startup that I was working for? What does it mean to actually fulfill the founding visions of JCR Licklider, Doug Engelbart, Bob Taylor, Alan Kay, these legends of computing, where the computer is in a kind of symbiotic relationship with the human mind, and computers are enabling us to communicate across greater spans in a kind of matrix of identity. For instance, there is the notion that the computers will allow us to externalize the metaphors we use to think, a speaker uses to think, and translate them into the metaphors that make sense to the listener. Basically still has not happened. What has happened is that we have pursued the emergent agency of the AIs that we didn't even realize we had already invented, that are incarnated as corporations and legal systems and so on. We had pursued their logic in service of the nutrients that we're receiving from them, with as subcomponents of their bodies, into systems that they're not serving human interests anymore, and they're not serving ecological interests in the sense that we have, that we understand them. And in a mundane sense, what that means is something like cancel culture is a great example, where like you're communicating at global scale with a bunch of people that do not have life experience like your life experience, and so they're probably not using the same words to mean the same things, and that creates gaps in mutual understanding that the technologies of human scale justice for which those technologies do not seem well fitted, and so we end up in what media theorist Marshall McLuhan called like neo-tribalist culture of shunning and exclusion, because we don't know how to arrive at the basis of common understanding with strangers on the other sides of the planet. And so what do? And we also don't have relationships with these people. We don't have the shared interdependent. We're not all working together yet on a single shared value system, and we're not all depending on one another to survive, by working on the same farm or whatever. And so it's easier than ever to meet a stranger and judge them and reject them. And that's not at all what the vision for computer augmented human communication would have suggested would happen by now. And people like Alan Kay that are still around are just morose about the direction that computing has taken. They're saying you've become slaves to some sort of this process that's actually removing your agency. That's this thing. How many people actually know how to write code? And I mean, it was Alan Kay wrote, created object-oriented programming as a way for kids to design software. And where is that? So, but anyway, I started asking. I'll wrap it here. It's I just started asking, what is it? I mean, this wasn't new. This was the sort of apotheosis of a years-long inquiry for me about, what does it look like for this famous poem by Richard Brautigan, All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace, in which he talks about the mutual programming harmony of humans and our digital technologies and the rest of the living world. What would it actually take to get there from here? And to me, it does not take new tools, in the sense that tools are commonly understood. It doesn't, a new computer is not going to get us there, because we're going to run up against the same thing we ran up against in the, with the Dynabook and object-oriented programming and all this stuff back in the 80s, which is that you can create something that people don't understand and don't know how to use, and then end up misappropriating. And so you actually have to, and this is not going to be alien to anyone listening to your show, but the real work is in a transformation of consciousness. And so what does it take to get people ready to use all of the crazy stuff that people are making now in a way that we can say we have earned, I guess? What does it mean to, I don't know if you've had Josh Schrei on your show,
No,
but
I haven't.
Joshua Schrei of the Emerald podcast, I think, I would love to listen to a conversation between the two of you. He led a workshop on embodied ethics in the age of AI that I was co-facilitating this spring. And, Josh and I had a great conversation on Future Fossils about this question of initiation. What does it look like to initiate people? Because the capitalism isn't going to do it, right? Capitalism doesn't want to have to initiate people, because that's an obstacle to selling them the product. But I'm sure the automotive industry probably, I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine it opposed driver's ed, because that means fewer people are buying cars. And so something like that is going on here. This question of everyone can use ChatGPT, but what does it mean to take the flattening of modernism, a world, the modern world being something that is actively, in which the weight has shifted from the encoded wisdom of the past and stable features of the landscape, and into a vision of future possibility that demands the transformation of everything, and the the capitalization of everything so as to create the substrate for some sort of transcendent cultural and economic gesture. How do we work to reestablish initiation and eldership and community held accountability and all of the good things of the pre-modern world in the ashes of the modern project? And I think it's just becoming more and more apparent that this is necessary. Thankfully, I think it's not something we have to, I believe that history or post-history or whatever sides with these things actually just being stable and convergent virtues. But yeah, and enormous rant. Thank you.
Yeah, the beautiful rant. The nature of technology, I think, started out as a burst of science and interest and tooling. And when that tooling got taken over by the capitalist economic model, you see a use of it to enhance predation. And I think one of the big things that I find part of the propaganda narrative of modern human is that they take out the fact that they are 100% of the time the apex predator of the earth and have not decided to stop predating on each other. And so I saw information technology get born. I was really interested in it from a user perspective, from like the simplest things, from seeing word processors become computers, etc., calculators becoming more sophisticated, very early on. And then all of a sudden, this burst of internet and the network state, but then the network state taking what I thought of as the very worst of people, combining them immediately together into the same bundle, and then just farming it out. And that was consumerism to shop and buy. And the other was to highly archetypalize each other in the form of identity and express that as a form of social interaction. So instead of getting to know you, I knew you as the categories that were available to me through a social media platform in the way that you described yourself, but it was so limited. It was boxed in to the nature of those algorithms. So instead of meeting you at spirit or meeting you at brotherhood or meeting you at soul, I met you at, these are my interests. This is the music I like. These are the books I recently read. Here's some photos of myself. And that has been pushed ad infinitum for the last 20 years. And in saying that, I just think 20 years is a very short period of time to be describing something of such great evolutionary importance. So when we look at long-term evolution, it took humans a long time to get to the first standardized tools. It took humans a long time to get to the first presentation and proliferation of a book and teaching literacy. And then it takes us only decades to go from these are the very first computers to mass use of computers, billions of people holding smartphones in their hands. When I was in junior high, when I was 12, 13 years old, and I saw the first computers, I said, someday we'll just hold those in our hands and we'll just talk to each other like this. I just had no idea how you would actually get there, And so I look at this and I think we've been through a period of time of great technology, of just immense predation, and that predation has some kind of outcome. And it leads me to the next space for great rant, which is the AI narrative and what it is and what's going on with it. And what I'm currently seeing in the nature of AI is, I think, the greatest source of predation that you could imagine, because you're using very advanced statistics with very advanced probabilistic mathematics to come together to find generative concepts of what's the next best thing, or to study the nature of data and our connection to that data to an ad infinitum degree that we've never had possible. So when you describe the nature of this complexity of whole teams studying a worm, or the impossibility of studying in the totality this vast narrative of the Amazon and what's behind me, to the interface of humans and technology and our dependence upon technology, we now have a scenario where human being is being equated to their use of technology, and AI is going to feast on that based on the predatory nature of the people in the systems that have already been created to do so, not based on the fact that that's the only way to proliferate or use this technology. So if I strip away the use of the technology and the use of the predation, all I see is vast amazingness. And then the moment I go to the actual predation and the expression of that predation at that time, I see this moment now in history where I think it can accelerate tremendously. And so I just toss that all to you.
Yeah. Well, okay. So what you're talking about is something that, I want to give a shout out to a couple people here. The first being my friends, JF Martell and Phil Ford, the hosts of Weird Studies podcast, who are teaching a course right now on a platform I've been waiting for years to see. They finally launched their Weirdosphere online academy, which, is finally brings into form this thing I've been begging for, which is for everyone interested in this phenomenon that our friend Eric Davis calls global weirding, to have us a kind of a para-academic, natively remote scene where we can explore and start to, discuss and generate and transmit stuff. And their first course that they're teaching is on the beauty and the horror. And in the episode of Weird Studies that they just released on this topic, a topic that I am also perennially fond of, they explore the poem about Tiger by William Blake, right? In which Blake is talking about the tiger as something that is, he's strangely so beautiful and yet so deadly. And there is this relationship between beauty in its extremes and danger or horror that has, that's why Otto says, mysterium et fascinans, that the fascination of being, which literally means, being bound up into the muscles of some of the mystery is, as well, leading ceremonies is it destroys the separate self. And so, or in Christianity they talk about, putting your head in the jaws of the lion. This shows up everywhere. There, you have the wrathful deities in Tibetan Buddhism that guard enlightenment by cutting off your head. And the way that Silicon Valley seems to want to take this now is by some sort of bastardized concretization of this principle into an idiocracy where we surrender our individual agency to participate as the terminal nodes of some vast computer regulated centralized network of of intelligence that we are advertising as collective intelligence. We are advertising it as the aggregate of humankind, but in practice, so far, it has the thing that I've learned communicating complex systems science professionally full time for 5 years is that collective intelligence really only works as advertised when diversity is maintained. And that means, as as an advocate of Web3, that means that decentralization is inarguable as a pillar of that approach. And so, when we talk about, software like ChatGPT and its increasing prominence in human society, what we're talking about is something like the way that, making like market legibility has destroyed more value than it has created, because as soon as you register a hectare of the Amazon in some sort of ecosystem services marketplace, you are translating all of this illegible value out. It's just a remainder that's invisible to your economic calculus. And what the only value that's registered is the value you already know how to see, which is why like so many people are saying that, and this is a separate and more kind of complicated point, but this is why a lot of people are saying that AI models are incapable of producing cultural novelty. Because they're basically just regurgitating recombinations of their training data, which I mean, I don't side with entirely, but it does take a human mind. It does take someone to observe the outputs and make sense of them to generate anything new. At any rate, I don't want to. Maybe we can touch on that in a moment, but like the thing that you're pointing out is that well, actually no, I do want to say the opposite, the sort of equal and opposite statement is that you can't get generative AI to do what you want it to do perfectly every time, reproducibly. It's the fact that hallucination cannot be removed from the outputs of generative AI because they are reconstituting their outputs from noise, actually tells us something really profound about the whoopsie that we've stumbled into by patterning these systems on the function of biological neural networks. And the fact that, again, as my friend Richard Doyle writes about in his book Darwin's Pharmacy, which I recommend to every single person listening. Just a fantastic book about ayahuasca and information theory and evolutionary biology. And he points back to the work of people like Roland Fisher and says, hallucination and perception exist on a continuum, and you can't actually, they're not discrete, separate things. Intuition and rationality are not separate. And so at any rate, the whole thing about danger and beauty is that, let me recommend two short reads, or relatively short reads, to listeners. One is my reflections on beta testing Google Glass, called The Evolution of Surveillance, in which I talked about AI and augmented reality and this new layer of surveillance and regulation, and how wearing an experimental face computer woke me up to this profound and disturbing sense that I was inducing in everyone I met, like that they felt like they had become a prey animal as soon as I was in the room with them, because I was wearing this head-mounted camera. And for some reason that did it, even when they were already putting their fingerprints in phones and all this stuff. Like the fact that it was on someone's face, that it had interpolated itself in between people in conversation, meant something much more obvious and offensive than it meant when you're just sitting there with your own pocket computer. And so I started thinking about the coevolution of intelligence and of the senses in this kind of predator-prey arms race that you're talking about. And interestingly, I think that it took us getting to the point where we had created tools that were truly awe-inspiring for us to sort of have that moment that I so often have in my own psychedelic experiences, where I'm just captured by some reverie of like, oh my God, that's beautiful. And then I realize, I have this moment where I wake with a start, and I realize I was totally lost contemplating that sunset and could easily have become somebody's food in that moment. And I think that something like that has happened to us collectively, where a lot of us are starting to ask, wait a minute, what the hell? Like, I was just having fun on social media. This is like a long kind of weird coming to awareness of this thing. And then the follow-up piece I wrote to that, which is called Improvising Out of Algorithmic Isolation, is about taking the from that paranoid kind of moment, taking a metanoia turn and a turn into non-duality, and understanding that there is something alive about all of these technologies, and there is something mechanical or algorithmic about our own bodies and our own minds, and that we're never going to be able to completely enclose or capture any of it. And so I'll just end this whole thing by saying that I've been thinking a lot about what Venkatesh Rao calls the cozy web. In an escape from the Cixin Liu calls the dark forest. This notion that maybe we don't find extraterrestrial life with SETI because nobody is talking, because everyone's aware there's a bigger thing out there waiting to pounce on them, which I think is an absolutely horrible way to consider the cosmos. But the dark forest applied to the internet, where we know we are being preyed upon, is completely reasonable. And so you see people retreating from large open surveillance advertising platforms like Facebook and so on into private gate-kept curated spaces like Mighty Networks and Discord and Slack and these kinds of things. And of course, these are not perfectly secure. They're porous, and they eventually some sort of distributed ledger based systems are bound to improve upon them to give us kind of what we actually want. But there's something going on right now, which is like the way that schools of fish in the Pacific Ocean have evolved to be smaller, to contain fewer fish per school in response to mass capture commercial fishing, because the commercial boats go after the biggest schools. And so the fish are collectively figuring out, like, no one fish is really aware this is happening, but like the schools are getting smaller because it's creating diminishing marginal returns for the fishers, and it's making it harder for the boats to track and actually go after these fish. And something like that's going on right now, where I'm seeing swaths of people drop out of Twitter and other social media platforms for something more like to bring it all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, my decision to leave Austin and move to Santa Fe, to like leave this seething, predatory, this feeding frenzy, and go to a place where, like people are gathered in burrows. And this is a pattern that happens again and again and again in the history of life. Just to call upon, my background in paleontology, anytime there's a mass extinction, volcanism or meteor impact or whatever, the animals that make it through these periods of epochal uncertainty are the burrowing animals. Not just, but often the animals that are able to hunker down and weather it out. And I think we're in something like that now, a kind of a dark age. But the very last thing I'll say about this is that when it comes to AI, what it means for the future of AI development, and why I was actually excited about Mozilla's efforts to foster a different vision of AI, is that it's very easy to imagine a future in which you are using AI that is based locally in your home on hardware that you own, and is trained on data that you have produced and that is yours, that others cannot freely access. And that kind of whatever biases might emerge in that locally trained model are going to be at least unique to your situation. And, like when you're talking to ChatGPT, you're talking to like the average of all of human culture. And unless you happen to be an average person, which, what does that even mean? Then it's less, it's less useful, which is why it's getting easier and easier for people to spot when a college student writes an essay with ChatGPT, or freakishly when people are publishing in scientific journals with generative AI content. It's like, what the hell are you thinking? Like it's just getting so obviously banal and useless in that respect. But that's not an indictment of generative AI generally. It's an indictment of this mass capture approach. And I think if you think about like fishing, what this means is actually returning to something more like sustainable village scale fishing, right? Where it's like, we can use these tools to feed your family. Once we're able to run to train and run AI in an environment and a technological substrate where we have more agency over this technology, and we're not just exposing ourselves, to some sort of nefarious extractive super agency. But the future looks like some sort of weird combination of both of those. So, c'est la vie. We're back in the jungle.
C'est la vie is right. You bring up the idea of hallucination and perception, and in ayahuasca, it's often a question of, am I having a vision? Am I not having a vision? Am I having a vision? What is a vision? What does it mean to have a vision? And recently I've been speaking with somebody who has been down here, but he's also, been on a vast journey himself. And he describes, instead of saying, in my point of view, or in my reality, he goes, in my hallucination. That's the first time I've heard someone say, he's in a business meeting, and he's like, well, in my hallucination, blah, 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 blah. And he describes it, his perception in that nature. And it got me thinking about the idea of this idea, vision in shamanism, and then psychedelics as a hallucinatory and its concept. And, I try to express to people that everything that happens from the moment you realize that the plant medicine is starting to, quote, work or function within you is a vision. The vision comes through the nature of the holistic expression of your senses. And during the onset phase of the experience, people often hallucinate because their senses are not calibrated anymore. But it brought me to this idea of like, is there an objective reality, or is there only the nature of perception, which would be much more hallucinatory? And there are tribal peoples that have said that daytime is dream time and nighttime is actually real time. So they had that orientation that was, flipped in that way. And then it brings up this idea of, hallucination in AI being connected to this generative concept of consuming itself to generate more hallucination to consume itself based on human patterning, right? So you hear about the generative language models being trained on the internet, right? Well, the internet in that predation model was not exemplifying the greatest intelligence of humanity. It wasn't exemplifying the broadest expression of what we could possibly create. The tools were actually deadening tools. They were this I call them terrible compression software tools on our intelligence to homogenize us into a way of communicating and expressing. And that's now what AI has consumed to generate. And it made me think that the reason why AI consumes itself and hallucinates is because humans have been hallucinating the whole time. They've been in some kind of distorted perceptive state, decalibrated mind state, and ultimately now some kind of like diverse expression of what people often call my world. Like, well, in my world, blah, 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 blah. And I came to the idea recently that no one speaks the language they say they speak. So I don't think I speak English, even though I'm utilizing English to communicate right now, because I don't know all the vocabulary of English. I would have to know every word and every aspect of its meaning to actually utilize the language in its totality. And I've never met anyone else who had that capacity either. And it made me think that lends even more credibility to this hypothesis of collective hallucination. And what we've been doing is creating a homogenization / popularity culture about that hallucination. And you touch on it in this idea of tribalism and counterculture, which is like, if you're not hallucinating the way I'm hallucinating, then I don't like your content and I don't want anything to do with it. If you're not hallucinating your dress up game, in your modern notion of what I call slave clothes, which is clothing made by underpaid, overworked sweatshop people, then I don't like you at all. If you're not putting expensive dirt on your face the way I tell you to, which is what I call makeup, then you're not someone I want to listen to. Right down here, they'll just put like, some ichote, some other kind of pigmentation on their face from a plant. Funny enough, we do that with makeup and charge exorbitant amounts of money for it, et cetera, et cetera. It's this hallucination of a culture that has been debased into that idea of idiocracy. And so it got me into this idea, well, in plant medicine, we're not actually helping someone hallucinate. We're taking them into a vision, which is actually recalibrate this distorted hallucination that they're in, that they call their reality or their point of view, or all their opinions in this great opinion factory of modern day society, where your opinions are actually taking us nowhere at all. You're given opinions, you spend all your time, effort, and energy on them, and then they don't actually lead to our success or our well-being or putting more food on the table or raising our children in a more, loving and compassionate home, or helping our children learn how to better prepare for the world that we're in, et cetera, et cetera. And it made me think, oh my God, what if everybody truly is just hallucinating? And we've boxed it into a series of rules that are so natural now for us, like being in a city and walking through a city and knowing I stay on the sidewalk, I use this crosswalk to cross the street, I only do it when the little hand flashes, do that, et cetera, et cetera. And it just it has taken me down my own rabbit hole of, I think we're hallucinating, we're boxing it in, and ultimately what comes from that. For a closing rant, take us away on that.
Oh boy. I mean, yeah, the whole my reality thing is as interesting as it is distressing. And, just as a sort of a meta strategy here, I encourage people to recognize that when I was talking about, like, the beauty and the horror, right? Ian McGilchrist, whose work I adore, and talking about the hemispheric lateralization in thinking, and how this predator and prey thing is actually encoded in the human brain, as he has come to understand through studying stroke patients, by the left hemisphere taking more of a goal-oriented, focused, dopaminergic kind of reward motivated approach to life, like that of a predator, and the right hemisphere's more holistic and intuitive approach was, kind of more peripheral and noisier, and admits more of the anomaly into experience, and errs on the side of what John Vervaeke calls relevance realization, that this is the hemisphere that seems to have evolved in order to cope with being a prey animal. And so true reason, is about the marriage of rationality and intuition. And so, the one way that I've come on this is by thinking about fear. Like, earlier on in my career, all I really wanted was to help people out of fear, like, the alienation and estrangement and horror of life in this century. And so I tell them, well, curiosity is the antidote to fear. That if you can find a way to technologize being curious about whatever it is that scares you, and this is something I learned through decades of shadow work, that you confront and engage and eventually identify as the content of these experiences by first taking an interest in them. And of course, like I was just saying, the opposite is also true. A homeopathic dose of fear can often be very helpful. but only if you're so curious that you don't recognize the inherent danger in what you're doing. Like my friends with DARPA grants that are like, hey, like, isn't it great that the military industrial complex wants me to fund this thing that I happen to be academically obsessed with? And they don't, it's like, again, it's just like straight out of Jurassic Park. It's like, oh, we're getting 5 years of research funding. Yay. Don't ask questions, and that there is the crux, the horror of the, the academic predicament now, which is, and has been for some time, that you're so busy singing for your supper that you don't get to ask moral questions, at any rate, that's brought us to a place where, at least in the humanities, the opposite is true, which is that you're so preoccupied with, moral concerns that, we've lost sight of what is actually true, and that this is all part of a larger thing. When I was talking about Jurassic Park and the advent of the CGI era, and which we're now seeing the fruits of in a deep fake anxiety during a United States election year, right? Like, here we are. This is the consequence of being able to totally program media and to regard everything as media, including your own body, which is that none of us know what the hell is real anymore. And so, we are coming up on a kind of reckoning where, what is it like? Muhammad Ali says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? Like, there's that great philosophical argument between, between idealists and materialists about, well, is it all in the mind, and so on. And then the answer is, well, I'm just going to hit you and remind you that there is a world outside of this. The way that this is showing up is that our preoccupation with this sort of transient fashion layer of culture, with makeup and clothing and streaming television and all of this stuff, has given us this illusion that we can just wrap ourselves in convenience and a world of our own choosing, a virtual reality, a hallucination that I as a consumer select. And that's running out of ground, and it's we're on a very long peninsula that's we're going to have to learn to swim here in the waters of something else, which is that the relationship between what we can and cannot choose, or the relationship between hallucination and perception, is vastly more complex than we have tricked ourselves into believing. And so I guess what am I saying? I'm saying that, like, I've watched some great stuff on YouTube about films like Everything Everywhere All at Once, and shows like Rick and Morty or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, these things, there's an obsession right now with the multiverse in popular culture, and with constructing meaning in our lives from the epistemic abyss, or the existential abyss, rather, of realizing that there's an infinite number of worlds on an equal footing ontologically. If this world is just as real as the world in which I'm a girl, or the world in which I'm brown, or the world in which I'm a frog, or whatever, why this one? And so this is again, this is the kind of question that I see a lot of people like Vervaeke or his co-author Brett Anderson asking in their work, which is, how do we recover from as the Western civilization? How does Western civilization recover from losing the universal matrix of the church and of Christianity as that substrate that provides shared meaning for all of us? And now that we can, move from one social milieu to another as easily as, speaking a URL into our devices, what is reality? And, so I think that all, like what we're due for here is a frame that can coexist with and actually depends upon the recognition of that which is culturally relative, of the diversity of human individual and cultural experience, but nonetheless continues out of that sort of deconstructive postmodern turn, as like integral theorists like Ken Wilber noted to me in my college years. Ken had his great gift to me and many other people was in helping us see that there's something beyond that kind of nihilism, beyond that beyond this sort of neo-tribal, in my reality kind of nonsense, which is that we can still find ways to agree. And that ultimately what science is in its, purest expression is built on the intuitive experience of phenomena that is then shared intersubjectively between people that agree that they're both seeing the same thing through the microscope or through, the ayahuasca ceremony or whatever. And then the third person in that, third person objectivity is someone with a different set of life experiences, is somebody from a different culture who can come in and verify that this is not something that is, but there's no end to that process. And so now when we look at stuff like, Pooja Olhaver and Vitalik Buterin and Glenn Weil wrote that paper a couple years ago on non-transferable soul-bound tokens on the blockchain that would basically allow us to start to account for how individual life experience can be woven together online to bridge the intersubjective with the objective, would allow us to start assigning kind of relative degrees of certainty in a way that is vastly more adaptive to the complexity of the digital landscape than college degrees, for instance. That you can say, oh, like this person has this set of experiences that, you start to see the context and the situatedness of their knowledge and how that knowledge is linked, like how the opinions that this person is coming to, are converging with people of very different life experiences in a way that with much, much greater resolution than, all of these scientists agree, but they're all academics. Now, what about all of these other non-academics, for instance? So the new system of reconstructed, trans-rational reason, and finding reality again in in the post-truth era is all about basically because we have to, because otherwise we're going to destroy the biosphere. And so suddenly we have the condition for interdependent co-arising that we had when we were all farming together. Like that's the only, like without that kind of existential threat, we actually don't have any reason to get along at planet scale. So that's my closing hurrah, I guess. And I am I'm exploring all of this stuff in a new project called Humans on the Loop, about agency in the age of automation and wisdom and technology. And I am here is the obscene moment where I say I am trying to find institutional backing for this project so that I can actually feed my kids. So if folks take interest in this stuff, I would love to talk with you. But yeah, that's the rant.
Well, Michael, first of all, thank you so much. That's an amazing rant. and I look forward to many more. That would take me right now into sovereignty. So maybe for another podcast in the future. How can people find you? How can they get in contact with you? If anyone out there knows how to help Michael get funding, please do. How do people best follow you and get in contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, I have a link tree, the .ee/Michael Garfield. That's a choose your own adventure of essays and lectures and art and all kinds of stuff. But I mean, really, I'm kind of going all in on my Substack and Patreon, which is the same feed. It's just meet people wherever they want to support the work or follow the work. Humans on the Loop and Future Fossils are both at michaelgarfield.substack.com. I am going to get you on Humans on the Loop soon, and you'll be one of the first interviews in that series. I'm really looking forward to that. So, yeah, and I quit Facebook last night. So, I mean, I'm there, but really only for professional purposes. So I'm retreating into smaller schools. If you, if all of this stuff is interesting to you, actually the highest signal to noise ratio, I think, that you can muster anywhere is my friends and I just launched a Discord server for holistic technology and wise innovation. And I'll send you the link to that. And that's also on my link tree. That has been a really interesting place because we're getting a whole bunch of people who are in they're like big tech company software engineers that are openly psychedelic and openly dissatisfied with the state of things right now, and are all, there's only like a couple hundred people in there, but they're all really thoughtful, interesting people engaged in intense practice and contemplation on this stuff. And so that's about more than me. That's about like a conversation that's happening that I would love to see more people engaged in.
Awesome. Well, we'll post all of that in the show notes. And I'm interested in getting into that Discord channel. So thank you so much for all of your incredible wisdom and ideas that you shared today. And I just look forward to more conversation.
Likewise, man. Keep kicking ass.